The morning after my son-in-law's visit, I found tire tracks pressed deep into the frost-covered lawn, cutting a wide arc from the side gate all the way to the back of the property. Two sets of boot prints, heading toward the old workshop. One set coming back. I stood there in my wool socks, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at those tracks like they were written in a language I almost understood. I should back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 64 years old. I live on a small acreage outside of Muskoka, Ontario, and for most of my life I believed that family was the one thing you could count on when everything else fell apart. I spent 31 years working as a structural inspector for the province. I raised two kids on my own after my wife Diane passed from cancer in 2009. I fixed fences and cleared snow and kept the wood stove burning through February when the temperature dropped to -30 and the pipes groaned in the walls. I did it without complaining because that is what you do. You hold things together. My daughter was 26 when she married him. I call him my son-in-law because that's all he ever was to me, even at the best of times. I tried with him. I genuinely tried. I brought him into the garage, showed him how to change the oil on his truck. I invited him hunting up near Parry Sound the first autumn they were together. He came once, complained about the cold the entire weekend, and never came again. That was fine. Not every man takes to the bush. I did not hold it against him. What I held against him came later. It started small. A comment here, a comment there. He had opinions about my property, about how much it was worth, how inefficiently I was using the land, how a man my age didn't really need 11 acres to himself. My daughter would go quiet when he said these things, not disagreeing, just quiet in a particular way that I recognized as the quiet of someone who had already heard the argument and stopped fighting it. I noticed, but I said nothing. Then last October, he brought up the idea of adding his name to the property title. Just for financial planning purposes, he said. For estate purposes, in case something happened to me. He had a way of framing everything as though he was doing me a favor, as though protecting my interests and advancing his own were perfectly aligned and wasn't that convenient for everyone. I told him I'd think about it. What I did instead was drive into town. It was a Thursday, the second week of October. The maples were going full red along the highway, and the air had that particular sharpness that only comes in Canadian autumn, the kind that wakes you up the moment you step outside. I stopped at the pharmacy on the main street to pick up my blood pressure medication. I've been on it 3 years now. Nothing serious. Just the kind of maintenance that comes with getting older and not having slept well for a decade. There was a man ahead of me at the counter. Older than me, I'd guess mid-70s, wearing a barn coat that had seen a lot of winters. He was digging through his wallet with the slow, careful movements of someone who already knew what he was going to find, and what he was going to find wasn't enough. The pharmacist, a young woman who looked like she was trying very hard to be patient, told him his total was $47 and change. He had 22. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just nodded slowly and said he'd come back at the end of the month. I don't know why I did it. I wasn't having a particularly good day. I wasn't feeling generous or noble. I was tired, and I had a long drive home, and I wanted to get my prescription and leave. But something about the way he said, "I'll come back at the end of the month." The absolute lack of self-pity in it. Just a plain statement of fact made me step forward and hand the pharmacist my debit card. The old man looked at me, not with the embarrassment you might expect. He looked at me the way you look at someone you recognize but can't quite place. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," I said. He picked up his paper bag and stood to the side while I paid for my own prescription. When I turned around, he was still there. "I know your property," he said, "out past the Muskoka Road turnoff, red metal roof." I told him yes, that was mine. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been walking that road since before you moved there. I know the people who moved through that area." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I thanked him and moved toward the door. He put a hand on my arm, not firmly, just enough to stop me. "Don't fix the lock on your workshop," he said. "Whatever you are planning to do with it, leave it the way it is." I looked at him. He looked back at me with clear, steady eyes. "After your son-in-law visits next," he said, Don't fix the lock." Then he walked out. I stood there for a moment in the fluorescent light of the pharmacy with my prescription bag in my hand, feeling like I had just had a conversation that happened slightly outside of normal time. The young pharmacist was already helping the next customer. The bell over the door was still settling. I drove home thinking about it the whole way. The lock on the workshop had been broken since August, the bolt had seized up from rust, and I'd been meaning to replace the whole mechanism. I had the new hardware sitting in a box on the workbench. My plan had been to install it that weekend. I left it. I told myself it was because I was tired, because the weekend came and went and I found other things to do. That was partly true, but I also kept hearing the old man's voice, the quiet certainty in it, and something in me trusted it the way you trust the sky when it turns a certain color before a storm. My son-in-law called 2 weeks later. He said he and my daughter were going to drive up for a visit on the Saturday. He had some papers he wanted me to look over, documents a friend of his had drawn up, related to the property title conversation we'd had. He said it casually, like it was a minor administrative matter, the kind of thing you handle between coffee and lunch. I said, "Fine, come up." I did not tell him I had already called my own lawyer. What I had learned, after a quietly frantic few weeks of phone calls and research, was that the documents he intended to bring were not simple estate planning forms. A friend of mine who had worked in real estate law for 30 years, now retired up near Gravenhurst, had explained it to me clearly. What my son-in-law was proposing was a co-ownership agreement structured in a way that would give him and my daughter joint decision-making authority over the property. If anything happened to me, or even if I became incapacitated temporarily, they would have the right to list it, sell it, or develop it without my sole consent. He was 62 years old, my son-in-law. He was not a young man acting out of ignorance. He had researched this. He had planned it. My daughter, I was not sure about. I did not know whether she understood fully what was in those documents, or whether she had simply trusted her husband the way she had been trusting him for 7 years. I did not want to believe she was part of it. I still do not want to believe she was part of it. I still do not want to believe that. They arrived on Saturday at noon. My daughter hugged me at the door. She looked tired in the way she'd been looking. Tired for a couple of years. A tiredness that sat behind her eyes and didn't go away with sleep. My son-in-law shook my hand. He'd brought a bottle of Ontario Red, a Cabernet Franc from the Niagara Peninsula, the kind of gesture that costs $40 and is meant to signal that you are a man of taste and goodwill. I put it on the counter and made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. He took out the folder with the papers. He started explaining them to me in the tone of voice people use when they are explaining something to someone they believe is not quite as sharp as they are, a tone that adds small, unnecessary clarifications after every point, as though they are being patient. I listened. I did not sign anything. I told him I wanted to have my lawyer review the documents first. The way his expression shifted when I said that, just slightly, just for a second, told me everything I needed to know about how confident he had been that I would not say that. He recovered quickly. He said, of course, absolutely. There was no rush. He just thought it would simplify things for everyone. He folded the papers back into the folder. My daughter looked at the table. They left around 4 o'clock. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the truck pull down the gravel driveway and turn onto the road. The afternoon light was doing something beautiful with the birch trees at the edge of the property. I watched until the truck was gone. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house settle and thought about the old man at the pharmacy and his particular instruction. Don't fix the lock on the workshop. I thought about the fact that I had not fixed it. I thought about whether that mattered. At some point I must have slept because I woke suddenly at just past 2 in the morning, fully awake the way you get when something has pulled you out of sleep before your body was ready. The bedroom was dark. The house was quiet. Then I heard it. A vehicle, moving slowly, without headlights. The particular crunch of gravel that is different from the sound of the wind in the trees. It came from the side of the property, near the old gate that leads to the back field. I got up. I did not turn on any lights. I moved to the window at the end of the upstairs hallway that looks out over the north side of the property. A dark pickup truck was parked just inside the gate, engine off. Two men, moving quickly along the edge of the field toward the workshop. They were carrying something. I could not see clearly in the dark, but one of them had something over his shoulder, a bag or a case, and the other one seemed to be on his phone, the small light of the screen visible even at that distance. My heart was doing something unpleasant in my chest. I went back to the bedroom and got my phone from the nightstand. I called the OPP non-emergency line, described what I was seeing, gave my address. The dispatcher asked if I felt I was in immediate danger. I said I did not know. She told me a unit would be dispatched. I went back to the window. The two men came out of the workshop after about 15 minutes. They moved back toward the truck quickly, no longer carrying whatever they had brought in. They left through the same gate they had entered, driving slow, no lights, until they hit the main road, and then the headlights came on and they were gone. I did not move from the window for a long time. The OPP arrived about 40 minutes later, a cruiser coming down the road without sirens. Two officers, a man and a woman, both younger than my youngest. I brought them to the workshop. I had not gone inside yet. I had not touched the lock. And here is the thing about the lock. The thing I understood only in that moment, because it was broken. It had not been forced. There were no scratches on it, no pry marks, no evidence that anyone had tampered with it to get in, which meant that when the officers went inside with their flashlights, what they found inside had not been planted in a locked building that someone had broken into. It was simply in an unsecured outbuilding on my property. What they found was a quantity of cannabis, not a personal use amount, not even close, packaged and vacuum sealed in a way that suggested distribution, along with a set of scales and other materials that completed the picture. If I had fixed the lock, if I had replaced that bolt the way I'd planned, the way any sensible man would have, the way I would have done without a second thought if a stranger at a pharmacy hadn't told me not to. If I had fixed it, the building would have been broken into, and the break-in would have explained away the planted evidence, and when the OPP eventually searched my property, after a tip, after some anonymous call from someone with my son-in-law's phone number, I would have been standing there trying to explain why my locked workshop contained a commercial quantity of drugs. I sat with the officers at my kitchen table until almost 5 in the morning. I told them everything, about the visit, about the documents, about the man at the pharmacy. I told them I had security cameras I had installed 2 years ago after a break-in at my neighbor's place, cameras that covered the north gate and the side of the workshop. The footage was clear. It was not my son-in-law in the footage. He was smart enough for that, but it was the truck he drove, or a truck registered to a numbered company that my lawyer subsequently connected back to him through the kind of patient, expensive, necessary paper trail work that takes 6 weeks and is absolutely worth every cent. What happened after is still working through the courts. I will not say more about that, not yet. Some things are not mine to tell in full until they are finished. What I will say is this. My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening in November. It was already dark by 5 o'clock the way it gets up here, the sky going the color of a bruise over the tree line. She called and she cried for a long time without saying much, and I listened. I did not say, "I told you so." I did not say anything that would have been satisfying to say in the moment, but damaging later. I just listened. She came up for a weekend in early December alone. We cut firewood together on the Saturday morning. She is not bad with a splitting maul, never was. Her mother taught her. We worked for a couple of hours without talking much, and then we went inside, and I made soup from the bones of the previous week's roast, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked until midnight. I do not know what her life looks like from here. I do not know what mine looks like either, not completely. The property is still mine. The documents were never signed. My lawyer has filed the appropriate things with the appropriate people, and the situation is what it is. And it is moving through the system the way these things move, slowly and with a great deal of paperwork. I think about the old man sometimes. I never saw him again after that Thursday at the pharmacy. I asked the pharmacist about him once, described him. She said she knew who I meant, but that he had moved away, gone to stay with family down in Guelph, she thought. I hope he is well. I hope the $47 bought him something that helped. I keep the workshop locked now. Properly locked. New bolt and all. the way it should have been from the start. But every time I go out there in the morning, every time I walk across the frost or the mud or the summer grass, depending on the season, I think about those tire tracks and the frozen lawn, about what was recorded and what was preserved and what might have been if I had just done the sensible, ordinary thing and fixed the lock when I was supposed to. Kindness is a strange thing. You extend it without thinking, without calculation, to a tired old man in a coat that has seen better winters, and sometimes it comes back to you in ways you could never have anticipated or deserved. I don't rake the frost in the mornings. I let it sit. I like looking at what passed through in the night. I've been thinking about that Thursday in October more than I expected to. Not obsessively, not with bitterness. Just the way you turn a smooth stone over in your hand when you find it on a trail. Something about the weight of it feels worth holding on to. What I keep coming back to is the sequence of it. Not the drama, not the legal proceedings, not the cold satisfaction of watching a plan unravel. What I keep coming back to is the small, ordinary moment that changed everything. A man short of $47 and a decision I made in about 3 seconds without thinking it through. That's it. That's the whole pivot point of the story. No planning, no strategy, no wisdom, just a reflex that felt right. I've lived long enough to know that doing the decent thing doesn't always pay off in any visible way. I've helped people who never acknowledged it. I've been fair in situations where fairness cost me. I don't say that to complain. I say it because I think it matters that you keep doing it anyway. Not because you expect something back, but because the kind of person you are when nobody's watching is the only real version of yourself you've got. That's the only thing I'd call character, not the grand gestures, the small ones, when you're tired and in a hurry and you do it anyway. But I also think about the other part of it, the part where I actually listened, because that's not nothing. A stranger told me something that made no logical sense, and instead of dismissing it, I sat with it. I didn't fix the lock. Some part of me stayed alert and open long enough to let an unusual piece of information do its work. I think about how easy it would have been to go home that afternoon and replace the bolt and feel productive about it. I almost did. Most people would have. The ability to hold uncertainty without filling it in immediately. To say, I don't understand this yet, but I'm going to let it sit. That's something I had to learn the hard way over 64 years, and I'm still not always good at it. And then there's the part where I didn't just feel afraid and confused. I called my lawyer, I checked the cameras, I gave the OPP everything I had. Fear without action is just suffering. What turned a frightening situation into something I could survive was the willingness to stay clear-headed when everything in me wanted to either confront my son-in-law directly or pretend I hadn't noticed anything. Neither of those would have helped. I had to hold my nerve and work the problem steadily, one step at a time over weeks. My daughter and I cut firewood together in December and didn't say much. It was enough. Some things take longer than a single conversation to come back from. I know that. I'm patient now, in ways I wasn't at 40. If there's anything worth passing along from all of it, it's this. Be the kind of person who pays for a stranger's prescription without keeping score. Stay awake enough to recognize when someone's trying to tell you something important, even if the words don't make immediate sense. And when things go wrong, because they will, they always do, don't collapse and don't lash out. Just stay steady, work the problem, keep going. That's all I've got. That, and 11 acres outside Muskoka, still mine, with a workshop that's properly locked now for the first time in months.